So, Ed Snowden, a lot of people in this country are probably curious, when was the last time you had substantive discussions about coming home to the United States? And would this still be your preference? Do you still refer to it as home?
The United States will always be my home, and I'll always be willing to come back on a single condition, and I've been quite clear about this over the years. This is that the government guarantee that I have the right, and every whistleblower has the right, to tell the jury why they did what they did. Right? We can disagree about whether this was right or wrong. We can disagree about whether this is good or bad. We can disagree about whether this is legal or illegal. That's right and proper in a democracy, but we have to agree that the jury is supposed to be the proper authority to ultimately decide, was this right or wrong? And I hate to say it, but under the current laws, that is explicitly forbidden under the Espionage Act, which, as you know, it's increasingly being used against the sources of journalism instead of foreign spies. The law makes no distinction between someone who tells a secret to a journalist and someone who tells a secret to a foreign government. Yeah, there has not been any movement, unfortunately, on that conversation since the Obama administration, when I told the government that all they need to do is give me the right of what we call a public interest defense. This is a fair trial, an open trial, where the jury hears what is happening and they decide, was this justified or not? Unfortunately, then Attorney General Eric Holder responded and said, we can't promise that. We won't promise that. We will promise not to torture you. Unfortunately, I'd say that's not quite enough.
Something you've said repeatedly is that you would expect and you would accept a certain punishment for your actions. What if that package of punishment included working for the home team? What if someone said, help us harden our elections from attack using your skills?
I would volunteer for that instantly. You know, they wouldn't even have to pay me for that. Remember, I volunteered to work for the CIA, for the NSA. When I came forward to reveal mass surveillance, which we need to be clear, the courts have found was in fact unlawful on the part of the government, and one court said likely unconstitutional. So I have no objection to helping the government. I came forward not to burn the NSA down. I came forward to reform it, to help it return to the ideals that we're all supposed to share. So there will never be a question of, when my government is ready, when my government wants me to help, I will be there.
How has your opinion changed about Mr. Putin since you've been in Russia?
Well, I don't think it really has changed, because the question might presume that I had a positive opinion at some point. I think everyone would agree, probably including the Russian president himself, that he is an authoritarian leader. I think the Russian government broadly does not have a good record on human rights, and that hasn't changed.
How odd is it to you that while you've been there, consensus here has hardened that they are the actors who interfered in our last presidential election?
I don't think that's especially surprising. There was a story published in the New York Times, actually reporting on a study in February of 2018, and it was also done in the Washington Post a few months prior to that, about the record of electoral interference. And they looked at the history of Russia and the Soviet Union and electoral interference by intelligence agencies. And they found, I think, 36 different cases of electoral interference over roughly the past 50 years. But then they also looked at the United States intelligence services and found that we had interfered in foreign elections 81 different times. Now, this is not to say one is better than the other. It's not about that. It's about budget, it's about capability. But what we do see from this is that what happened in 2016 actually was not unusual from the perspective of intelligence agencies. This is what they believe they are hired to do. What we have to do is find out how to secure our systems against the attacks that we know are inevitable.
Something you've been asked before, something you have answered before, but since this is a fresh occasion, we'll ask it again. Why not stay in this country and face the music if you believed in the strength of your conviction?
This is a great question, Brian, and I'm glad you asked it. When we say face the music, the question is, well, what song are they playing? I was intentionally charged, as every major whistleblower in the last decades has been, with a very particular crime. This is a violation of the Espionage Act of 1917. And this is a law that is explicitly designed to prohibit a meaningful defense in court. This is applied, or this law is used against people the only thing that they've done, and this is by the government's own terms, the only thing the government accuses people defending themselves against this charge have done is that they have told something to a journalist that the government considers classified. That is the whole of the crime. They don't consider whether it was good or bad. They don't consider whether or not it caused harm. Simply, did you tell something classified to a journalist? If you did, the jury is not allowed to consider. In fact, they're explicitly forbidden from considering why you told journalists. They're explicitly forbidden from considering, did it result in a public benefit, right? Did it further the public interest? Instead, they simply say, did you tell a journalist something classified? So I am not, if I had stayed in the United States, and my good friend Daniel Ellsberg, by the way, has told me that I was right not to stand and wait for an inevitable arrest, because the laws and the way they're enforced today is not the same as the 1970s when he came forward with the Pentagon Papers. I would not have received a fair trial. There would not have been much of a trial at all. I would only have received a sentencing. And the question there is, what message does that send, whether you like me or not? I could be the best person in the world, I could be the worst. What message does a conviction where you spend the rest of your life in prison for telling journalists things that change the laws of the United States, that have resulted in the most substantive reforms to intelligence authorities since the 1970s, if the only result of doing that is a life sentence in prison, the next person who sees something criminal happening in the United States government will be discouraged from coming forward, and I can't be a part of that.
Where do your parents come down on what you did? In the book, we learn a lot more than we knew about them. They were both, we say this in quotes, deep staters. We learn that they both had varying degrees of security clearances in their lives.
Yeah, I come from a federal family. My father worked for the military, my mother works for the courts. My whole line, going back, has worked in the government service. So I think this was difficult for them. And in fact, one of the things that I will be eternally grateful for is the fact that they still stand by me today and believe that I did the right thing.
Were they present for your wedding? You've gone and gotten married in the years since we've last spoken.
There hasn't been a wedding yet, actually. We were married, but it was just a paperwork exercise in a courthouse because Lindsay and I had been living together. We had been in love with each other. We had been in a relationship for more than 10 years. There will be a wedding someday, Brian, and I hope you'll be there.
What do you make of Donald Trump?
There are so many things that are said about the president right now, and so much thinking, and honestly, I try not to think about it. There's so much chaos, and there are so many aggressive and offensive things said. I think even his supporters would grant that. But I think he's actually quite simple to understand. Donald Trump strikes me like nothing so much as a man who has never really known a love that he hasn't had to pay for. And so everything that he does is informed by a kind of transactionalism, I think, and what he is actually looking for is simply for people to like him. unfortunately, that produces a lot of negative effects.
Do you believe he is a threat to national security?
I mean, this is a question of who defines national security. What is national security? When we used to talk about national security, we thought about public safety, but now national security really means the security of the system itself, the institution of government. And I think he's made it his stated goal to change the way that system works. I think we have seen tremendous harm done to civil liberties in the United States, increasingly since September 11th, and I haven't seen any reduction in the rate of that.